So we're in this series between John 14 and John 17. We spent a lot of time this year talking about truth. That in John 14, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And when he is arrested, Pontius Pilate says, well, what is truth? And so in that space between those two things, this series is looking in the Gospel of John between Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and when he is arrested. This is a space between foot washing or communion in the other Gospels and when Jesus is arrested. It is a look at Jesus, essentially his last words to his followers before he is arrested in the Gospel of John. We're going to be in John 16 this morning. We're going to look at one passage, 3 verses, and I'm going to leave this on the screen the whole time. We're going to walk through this real slow. Jesus says, I have said these things to you to keep you from stumbling. I ran that race yesterday too, and I'm working hard actively at this moment to keep from stumbling up here. Y'all don't see me like in the Facebook pictures and all that stuff, we all look great or whatever. You don't see me stretched out last night with my wife, like stretching my legs, being like, can I get from there to here this morning? So full disclosure, like I'm working hard to keep from stumbling as we speak. I have said these things to you to keep you from stumbling. Remember, he's talking to his people. Jesus is talking to his followers. I've said these things to you to keep you from stumbling. They will put you out of the synagogues. And indeed, an hour is coming when those who kill you will think that by doing so, they are offering worship to God. And they'll do this because they have not known the Father and they have not known me. It's going to be up there the whole morning today as we're walking through this passage. A few years ago, I clicked on this ad that was in my Facebook feed from a church marketing agency. It was something like, want to be better at reaching new visitors? Click here. These are the kinds of things that the algorithm brings my way. And so I clicked on this thing and, I traded my phone number and my email address for these can't miss strategies of how to connect with new people while I was serving a smaller church in Virginia. And I wasn't even surprised. I gave them my number. They texted me 4 times and called me twice in the next 24 hours. I wasn't even surprised by that. I figured I was kind of signing up for some version of that. But what I should have known or should have realized is that their can't miss strategies for reaching new people or reaching first-time visitors were essentially a different version of that same mentality. What do you do when someone visits your church for the first time? Attack them with Jesus, baby, right? Their strategy was, if someone visits your church for the first time and gives you their contact information, you reach out to that person every single day for 6 days in a row. I don't know about you. If this is your first morning here and you're like, we need to leave, I feel you, because if I meet you and I give you my contact information and you reach out to me 6 days in a row, I would call the police, right? And so there was this sense of maybe that works some places. It just felt very aggressive and very I've given you this much of myself, and that apparently was too much of myself to give to you, and now you are just swarming and surrounding me in all of these ways that are meant to build and cultivate a relationship, but actually end up feeling quite inauthentic, and in fact cause me to run the other way and unsubscribe, yeah? Think about it like this. Let's say you go out with somebody on a date. You go out with somebody on a first date, and it goes well. And you had a good time, and they had a good time, and you guys want to see each other again, and you're hopeful. So you're going to go out a second time. So you start researching this person. And by researching, I mean you stalk them aggressively on social media. And by after the first date, I mean as soon as you met them. But whatever, that's cool. We all do that, right? So you start researching this person, and they start researching you. And they look at all your photos. And they read all your posts, and they study your language. They read the comments, too. And they keep going. They find your friends, and they start sending them messages asking what you're really like. What kind of food do you like? What kind of food do you hate? Where should they take you on your second date? You posted a photo one time at a Mexican restaurant. They find the server in the background of the photo, call the restaurant, ask to speak to them, and ask what you ordered and if you were a generous tipper. They call your high school, ask for a transcript. They ask to speak to teachers who were there when you were there so they can know what you were like growing up. They call your office, and they ask to speak to your supervisor and gently ask about your household income and your most recent performance review. And you call the police, right? But let's pretend in this scenario that you don't know any of this is happening. Your friends are bad friends. They don't tell you about the CIA level of information gathering that's taken place. And then right before your second date, this obviously crazy person runs into a mutual acquaintance that you have. And this mutual acquaintance says, "Oh yeah, so-and-so, I know them, they're great. Do you know them really well?" And they say, "Oh yeah, I know them really well. In fact, I might know them better than anybody." Now, whatever their level of obvious crazy is, here's the question. Does that person actually know you? Of course not, right? No. They know a lot about you, and they are fast learners about the facts of your life. They know a lot about the surface, but they don't know the truth of who you actually are. That's in part because they're crazy, but that's also in part because they haven't come to experience your character for themselves. They simply, even if they weren't crazy, have not had enough time to. Never mind all that. The next stop on this crazy train is when they start introducing themselves as your boyfriend or your girlfriend. And even, not when you're around, because you'd put a stop to all that. Again, you call the police. But when you're not around, they start introducing themselves that way, even to people who don't even know you. When someone says, "Hey, I'm Steve from marketing," they say, "Hey, I'm so-and-so's boyfriend. I'm so-and-so's girlfriend." We would say, that seems super unhealthy. But then when you finally do go on that second date, because your friends were bad friends and didn't tell you about any of this, when you sit down at the restaurant and open your mouth, the other person says, hey, nope, it's okay. I've learned everything about you. They're not only going to do the audacious thing of ordering for you at the restaurant, but they're like, "Listen, I got it. I got you. I've learned everything I need to know about you. You don't have to say anything because I've mastered the details of your life. And I've learned so much about you that I can just speak for you." Again, you call the police. But let's take a little less crazy, or a little more crazy as it was, out of this scenario. Just think about it in real life. Think about it like in a long-term relationship. My wife and I have been together for 12 years. What if I looked at Alex and I was like, "You know what, I'm good. I got you. I've learned you. I'm good. Like, you don't have to tell me anything else about you. And we could stay together and keep doing this other stuff, but like, I've got you down. You're good. I don't need to learn anything new. I don't need to learn anything else. I got it. I got the gist of all of this." And it makes me sad to think about ways in which some version of that can actually, and does actually, take place in long-term relationships, because the beauty of it is the way God made us in his image, we can keep learning. We can keep growing together, and we don't just learn more about each other, we learn each other. We don't just know facts, we know and experience the truth of each other's character for ourselves. Because underneath all of this is that any relationship is not static, it's dynamic. Relationships grow, they stretch, they have seasons, and we can continue to learn each other as we go. Last night, when Tennessee tipped off at the ungodly hour of 9:53 p.m., my wife made it to halftime. And it was like, she was like, "Okay, I'm going to go to bed. Do you want to stay back here in the bedroom and keep watching?" And I was like, "Listen, I'm going to go in the living room. Like, I know me, and I know you, and my ability to watch this game quietly is pretty low. So I'm going to go in the living room. Good night, I love you." And she was like, "Yeah, that seems to be a good choice. It makes sense," right? Like, you can learn and grow and still have these conversations of like, we know each other really well, but there's still a like, "Do you want to try to watch it quietly?" No? Okay, probably for the best. It was for the best, in fact, right? None of us, I don't care if you believe in Jesus or not, none of us is a fixed point. No human being is a fixed point. All of us are dynamic. We're made this way. And all creation is made this way. Your dog probably can learn some new tricks, but not like human beings can. You and I, we stretch and grow. We have the capacity to do all of these things in part because that's how we're made to be. We get to keep learning each other. We get to keep knowing each other. And when Jesus says they will put you out of the synagogues, and think about it, if you're hearing this as disciples, I'm going to get put out of the synagogue. An hour is coming when apparently I'm also going to be killed, and not by the Romans, though the Romans, as they're getting ready to be for Jesus, become kind of the tool or the means. But I'm going to get killed by people who think that they're doing it because they're worshiping God. They're going to put you out of the synagogues, and an hour is coming when the people who kill you will think that by doing so they are offering worship to God, and they will do this because they haven't known the Father and they don't know me. So again, when you're reading they will put you out of the synagogues, they will do this. This is not the Romans or a random place of power where one of these disciples is going to go and give his life decades from now or anything like that. The they is the people who are supposed to be following God. The they is the people who are in power. The Pharisees, the teachers of the law, as the Gospel of Matthew would call it. The they is the people who think that they are doing the right thing by God because they know a lot about God. But somewhere along the way, they stopped knowing God. And because of that, they certainly don't know this Jesus. And no one sets out to be this way. The Pharisees don't set out to become this. The Pharisees, in fact, learning about God is their whole life. It's their whole identity. It's what they train for. It's what they aspire to be. It's just also probably true at some point in time that they loved the things that came from knowing about God. The status, the power, the way people look at him, all of it. And their love of those things got tied tight around their sense of identity. And at some point, they crossed a threshold where they loved what they got from knowing about God more than they loved God himself. Because we can laugh about that in a marriage or whatever, but it is deceptively easy for Christians to say to ourselves, you know what, Jesus, I got it. I got it. I got it. I got that. I got this. I got Easter, sunrise, crucified, dead, and buried, third day, rose again. My sins are forgiven. Church, got it. Got it. Been doing this a long time. I'm good. I'm good. Super easy. No one sets out to be that way. But at some point, it can become easy for us to stop believing in renewal. It can become easy for us to think of our faith as a fixed point. It can even sometimes become important, where we tell ourselves it's important to believe that our faith is a fixed point rooted in this certain certainties and all these kinds of things. And the truth is that God is still working on us, and not just working on us, but inviting us to know him deeper and more fully. And at some point for those Pharisees and teachers of the law, a little further down the road, they lost their ability to discern the nature and character of God without the filter of, well, this is what it means to me to be a Pharisee. And everything begins filtering through the lens, not of Jesus, or they would have said not of God at the center, but what it means to me to be a Pharisee at the center. So much so that when Jesus shows up, not only do they not recognize him, they are basically from the beginning, openly antagonistic towards him. When God actually shows up in human form, they are against him from the beginning. And here's the thing, like, the Pharisees didn't crucify Jesus any more than I did, right? The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, their sin, my sin, our sin crucifies Jesus. The Pharisees didn't crucify him any more or any less than I did. We're all up there so that he might be in all of us. But when Christ is risen, death is defeated, when there's even more reason to believe that he is the one, they triple down on it. Because they're not going to kill the disciples tonight. That's going to come after the resurrection, after this movement, after all of these things, putting his followers out of the synagogue, helping to condemn them to death like Stephen and others, and do it believing that it's worship. And they do it because they have not known the Father, which means, sadly for them, they have not known Jesus. Like, this is an awful passage and all that, but there's some sadness to it. They didn't set out to be this way. And at the end, not only do they miss what God is doing, they're openly antagonistic to it. And in the end, Jesus says they never, or they didn't really know God. So, right, good question for any Sunday. How do we not be a Pharisee? Yeah? At the beginning, Jesus says, I've said these things to you to keep you from stumbling. A stumbling block is common biblical language. A stumbling block was a tangible, concrete thing. In the Old Testament, there are laws that say, don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Common sense, right? Don't be a jerk. If someone's blind, don't put something in front of them and sneak around the corner and watch for them to trip and fall, yeah? But the use of stumbling block in that language implies this. A stumbling block is a thing that you don't see coming. It was used in a way to say, don't be harmful to those who are vulnerable. Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. And blind is what Jesus will call the Pharisees more than he calls them anything else. So yes, it's true. How do we avoid being Pharisees? How do we make sure we don't miss this and all those kinds of things? It's of crucial importance to remember that our call is not just to be believers, but to be disciples. Intentional discipleship is what we're about. My job, my call is not just to believe in Jesus or learn about him, but to believe the audacious idea that Jesus invites us to be like him, which is impossible on our own, but that's what this is all about, because now, through death and resurrection, we get the Holy Spirit to become the work of sanctification in our lives. We're not just invited to learn about him. We're invited to know him and even be one small inch at a time more like him. So yeah, spend time learning about him. Read the Bible, pray, worship, serve, show up, even though the Vols played at 9:53 last night, right? Like, a church's primary job is to help us be like Jesus and to help others be invited into that relationship, not to learn about him, but to be like him. But also remember that while we're looking out for stumbling blocks, we also want to make sure that we turn that gaze inward a little bit too. Because at the other end of this, it's easy for us as Christians sometimes to say, yep, I know Jesus. I don't just know about him, but man, I know Jesus, and I know him really well. You know who doesn't know Jesus? Those other guys, right? I know Jesus so well that I can tell you who doesn't know him, which is usually the people who voted for the other guy, right? And are making a different set of choices than you're making and I'm making. And I know Jesus so well that I can look at you and say, oh, don't know Jesus quite as well as you thought, right? And this world is full of people on both ends of the spectrum who want to speak and say, Jesus would never do this, or Jesus would never support this. And neither political party has cornered the market on that. It just ends up being one looking at the other and saying, Jesus would never support this. Well, Jesus would never support that, or this or that or whatever. And we spend so much time looking at other people to blame that we're going to trip right over ourselves. How do you avoid stumbling blocks? Look for them. But also, don't forget to look in. Don't forget to look, I cannot forget to look in the mirror as well. When we talk about taking the Lord's name in vain, history is full of examples. I think taking the Lord's name in vain is much less about saying a certain cuss word that you absolutely should not say, but much more about doing and saying things in the name of Jesus that Jesus might look at and say, that's not what I had in mind. And that's not new. Centuries ago, millions of people fought and died halfway around the world in the Crusades because popes stood up and said the way to follow Jesus in this world was to pick up your sword and walk across the world and fight and die. And it's so easy for other things to become our filters and our centers and all these other kinds of things. How do you avoid being a Pharisee? Watch out for stumbling blocks. How do you watch out for stumbling blocks? Try to look for them, but make sure we're looking at ourselves too. I say all that to say in closing, the point of looking at ourselves is not shame. We want to talk about this next week. When we say looking at ourselves, it's not that we would look at ourselves and say, well, I'm so unworthy and so wretched and so all these other things and nothing and all this other stuff. It's not shame. It's conviction, which is exactly what Jesus is getting ready to talk about next. But as we seek to make sure we're not being a Pharisee, as we seek not just to know about God, but to know God and to not stop, to not tell ourselves, I've got it all figured out, I've got it nailed, I've been coming to church a long time, I've got it. But to keep investing, keep connecting, keep seeking, keep doing all of these things together. How do you keep from stumbling? You keep your eyes open, but make sure those eyes get turned inward too, not in shame, but in wonder. Because the truth is, we have so much left to learn about an infinite God. And the truth is also, that is exactly what he is inviting us to do.